Its energy surrounds us and binds us.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Carbonite Convos. Today's show will be about Emperor Palpatine, aka Darth Sidious, and his willingness to replace his current apprentice should someone new come along that is stronger than his current one. So, in the Old Republic, the Jedi have proved that the connection between master and apprentice is a bond not easily broken. Whether it be Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan and Anakin, Anakin and Ahsoka, or any of the other countless duos throughout the Jedi Order. The Jedi were forbidden from forming any such attachments. However, the same cannot be said for the Sith. Throughout Star Wars canon, Emperor Palpatine proved many times how little he thought of his apprentices. In a conversation with Vader, Palpatine described the dark side as strength. In his eyes, if someone came along that was more powerful and could defeat Vader, then that is who he wanted at his side. Emperor Palpatine rarely missed an opportunity to upgrade in terms of who his apprentice was, never hesitating when a new and powerful one came along. This can first be seen in the Clone Wars, during a stunning battle between Darth Sidious and Darth Maul in Savage Opress. Maul, in hopes of returning to Sidious's side, shows him what he's accomplished since his assumed death in the Phantom Menace. Surprised that Maul had survived his injuries from this failure at the hands of Obi-Wan, Palpatine saw Maul and Savage as rivals. After killing Savage, in his sinister voice, Palpatine exclaims, "Remember, the first and only reality of the Sith. There can only be two, and you are no longer my apprentice. You have been replaced." The next incident comes at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, after Anakin and Obi-Wan's brief battle against Count Dooku. On his knees at the end of two lightsaber blades, Dooku hears Chancellor Palpatine tell Anakin to kill him then and there. Anakin, visibly torn, argues that killing Dooku while he's unarmed is not the Jedi way. Then, followed by arguably Palpatine's most famous line, "Do it." Palpatine showed no remorse, having Anakin kill his current apprentice without hesitation. Finally, fast-forwarding to Marvel Comics canon comic Vader, Palpatine, now Emperor, once again shows that he has no intention of keeping any apprentice if a stronger one comes along. In this comic, we meet Silo 4, a humanoid doctor who cybernetically enhanced himself into an immortal system capable of assuming another body when the previous one died. Silo 4 is hired by the Emperor to train a group of cybernetically enhanced individuals to challenge Vader's position at Palpatine's side. Vader found out about this plan after killing Silo 4 and traveled to the far reaches of space to hunt down the individuals that Sidious thought were worthy enough to replace him. This is where Vader meets Silo 5 and discovers the full power of Silo's cybernetic system, while also coming face to face with Silo's apprentices. Shortly after Palpatine arrives and orders Silo to show him the power of these cybernetic apprentices, Vader emerged victorious, but with a new understanding that his master has every intent to replace him, should someone stronger present themselves. The comic scene ends with a short speech from Emperor Palpatine. "The dark side is strength. If they defeat you, they are stronger. If you defeat them, you prove you are. This is the way of the Sith. I named you Vader after you pledged yourself to the Sith. You proved yourself worthy of it then. I'm certain you will prove yourself worthy now." In the end, there can only be two, and Darth Sidious is determined to have the strongest apprentice at his command. So Alec, what are some of your initial thoughts?
Man, first and foremost, I think it's really interesting looking at the importance of, obviously, how important Emperor Palpatine is to the entire story arc, right?
Definitely.
And his willingness to want to replace his apprentice, who we probably view as, one of, if not the most powerful Sith or Jedi of all time. And the fact that Palpatine was trying to replace him, but the fact that Vader kept, beating these challengers and people trying to take a spot, I thought just, was really, really interesting.
Definitely. I think one of the most interesting parts is if you watch the original trilogy, you watch it and you see the Emperor starting in Empire Strikes Back, but you see the relationship between Palpatine and Vader. You see pretty much nothing but respect. It seems like obviously it's master and apprentice, so there's that that power balance between the two, but you don't really realize the complexity of their relationship until you read the comics, until you read some of these books, and you realize that, like we just talked about in the story, that Palpatine was 100% willing to dump Vader if he had anybody even slightly stronger than him. So it's kind of hard to believe that Palpatine worked in the shadows for however many decades he was working, like training Anakin in a way, to be his apprentice, for him to just pretty much be willing to ditch him whenever he chose, if someone slightly stronger came along. So that's one of the things I found like most interesting about the relationship, that you don't really realize before until you dig a little deeper.
Right. It seems like, Anakin is such an important part of his plan. In reality, it's just any powerful Force user.
Definitely.
But yeah, that's super interesting. So let me ask you this, okay? Obviously, the whole point of this whole thing is that Palpatine was looking for the most powerful person to be by his side. Okay, do you think that his search to replace Vader is kind of similar to that of when he killed his master Darth Plagueis, and do you think that was him trying to, search for that power?
Like in what term? Sorry, I was just a little confused. Like, sorry, can you like rephrase a little bit? I was just a little confused.
Yeah. So obviously, Palpatine killed his master.
Yeah.
Okay. That was him trying to get rid of him to replace himself in that power position.
Yeah. So Are you asking if he wants someone to eventually replace him?
Yes.
See, I don't think so. I think if you... Sorry, I just got to think about it for a second. I think one of Plagueis's main mistakes was, Plagueis wanted to live forever. He wanted to find out the secret of life and the secret to immortality. Unfortunately, that was his downfall because, like Palpatine told Anakin, Plagueis taught him everything he knew. Obviously, then he killed him in his sleep. So I think that's where Plagueis's big downfall was, and I think Palpatine learns from that. And if you read the comics and you look at all these stories, Palpatine is very almost anxious. Like he always questions people whether that, are you going to betray me? Why are you asking so many questions? Why are you doing this, doing that? So he's definitely on edge, thinking that if Palpatine could kill Plagueis, any of his apprentices could kill him too. I know he does it with Dooku a couple times in the Clone Wars, thinking that he's going to betray him. He does it with Vader many times throughout the comics. So I think Palpatine knows not to teach Vader every single thing. In the comic that I talked about in the story, Palpatine tells Vader, stop asking these questions. It's your job to learn. It's my job it's your job to learn everything that I have to teach. It's my job to learn everything that there is to teach. And I thought that was a powerful line, because even if he learned all that he could, I don't think he'd teach Vader all that, because then what point would Vader have to be someone's servant rather than the master, if that makes sense?
Right. No, 100%, man. Speaking of that topic, it's really interesting looking at the relationship between Anakin and Palpatine, especially in the prequels and throughout Clone Wars. Like, you mentioned earlier, Anakin seems like his right-hand man, like that he's important to his plan, and that, all this revolves around him. And it's really interesting because that kind of goes against, obviously, the Jedi way, right? They don't like to form attachments. They don't like to use emotion and compassion and those sort of things when they're making decisions or when they're fighting. And basically, it's really, really interesting looking at the deception that Palpatine was able to use to, I guess, more or less create Vader. And it's kind of cool just looking at, again, that relationship.
Definitely. If you look in, I think it's most prominent in Revenge of the Sith, where it's very obvious that nobody trusts the Chancellor except for Anakin. And, obviously people on the outside, if they're willing to keep him in power, because he is a good leader. Um, but it was pretty clear that the Jedi Council didn't trust him because they could sense something. Obviously, the dark side clouds their vision, but they knew something was up. They knew something was sketchy about the Chancellor, and Anakin, having had Palpatine as his mentor, from the second he got to Coruscant, for the most part, he had this relationship built with him for many, many years. So I think when the council realizes, something's up about this guy, and then Anakin almost sees that as the Jedi turning their back on someone that's innocent. And when you talk about the relationship between Palpatine and Anakin, it really, Palpatine, if you look at it, really doesn't care about Anakin. He does because he wants Anakin to further Palpatine's vision. But, he wanted to do that with Darth Maul. Who knows? Possibly he could have done it with Dooku, but I think Dooku was just a replacement for Maul and a placeholder for Anakin. But it was clear throughout the movies, throughout the prequels, that Palpatine's just telling Anakin what he wants to hear. Anakin comes to him when he's distressed. He obviously trusts him, and that's what he uses in his favor to continue gaining his trust and slowly turn him from the council and just from the ways of the Jedi.
So in your opinion, why do you think it was so easy for Anakin to get attached to Palpatine, and it was easy for Palpatine to be able to, convince Anakin that he's innocent, that his intentions were in a good place, and those sort of things?
I don't know. I think one of the main things is because he came to the Jedi Order at such a young age. Remember, he came when I think he was 9 years old when he first came. So he already had these attachments to his mother. He already was pretty much a fully formed human being, like if that makes sense. He already had learned all of these emotions, and then you bring him to the Jedi Order, and they almost have to train him not to use everything that he's had, like compassion, love, all these things that you're born with as a human. They affect everything in our lives, and for them to try to, not use those emotions, that could be a big reason why, Palpatine, on the other hand, is sitting there almost understanding where Anakin comes from, because Anakin can't tell Obi-Wan, the council, he can't tell all of his real mentors and leaders about what he's doing. They don't know he's married to Padme. I don't even know if they know that he killed the Tusken Raiders. So Palpatine's that one person with a lot of power outside the Jedi Order that Anakin can talk to and get good advice from. But he just doesn't know that that's what Palpatine's grooming him for, just to be by his side.
Right, and I definitely think it has something to do as well with the fact that he kind of seemed like a father figure to him.
Yeah, and he never had one.
He had never had that before. So I think that alone, too, was kind of confusing him on who to trust, really, because he knew he needed to trust the Jedi Council. But then this man was giving him guidance and trying to groom him. And I get it goes against human emotion and human action to not trust that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's funny that you bring up a father figure when not a lot of people know, but I know it's prevalent in the comics that Anakin's the chosen one, and he was born to be the chosen one. And you look at the history between Palpatine and Anakin. Palpatine, when you say he's a father figure, Palpatine literally made Anakin. He influenced the midichlorians inside Shmi Skywalker and made a baby. And he made that specifically for his taking. So I think it was really interesting that, it was almost like, the story of Mary. Jesus and Mary, it's clearly, Jesus was made to be our beacon of hope and light, but Anakin was almost what made the complete opposite. just made for Palpatine's use so he could gain complete power. So it is really interesting the fact that you bring up the father figure.
Right. So speaking of fathers, obviously in Return of the Jedi, Vader goes back and what we thought kills Palpatine at the time to save his son and to save his son from having to kill him. So do you think that in that moment when Palpatine was not really able to convince Luke to join his side and replace his father at his side, do you think that ended up being Palpatine's biggest failure and that it eventually led to his downfall and Rise of Skywalker?
That's a really good question. I don't. In a way, I think that's his biggest downfall. If you take a step back and look at kind of the bigger picture of it, I think his biggest downfall was not completely killing Anakin Skywalker. And him, I mean that in a way. Darth Vader killed Anakin. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. That was Palpatine's plan. He gave him the name Darth Vader as a symbol of power. But I think Palpatine's biggest failure was not draining all of Anakin Skywalker out of Vader. Because you look at Palpatine, you can tell he's an evil character. There's nothing that ever makes you think different. And then you see Vader, you see Luke, you see Padme. They see the good in him. They all say that there's still light in him. And it's just really cool because they sense that and they can tell. But you never once hear someone say about Palpatine, there's still good in him. So throughout his whole time as Darth Vader, you still get these little inklings of Anakin Skywalker. You read the comics and he thinks about Padme. He thinks about Obi-Wan. He thinks about the mistake he made, all the mistakes he made, and his failure on Mustafar fighting Obi-Wan, and eventually killing Padme in a way. So you see all of these things that show you that Anakin Skywalker is still alive. But even the Emperor senses it. The Emperor knows that there are things eating away at Vader's soul. So I think if he would have been able to completely kill off Anakin Skywalker, get rid of him, Luke wouldn't have had... There really wouldn't have been a choice because, yes, Darth Vader is his father, but at that point, if there really is no more Anakin Skywalker, then Darth Vader isn't your dad. Because Anakin Skywalker was, and he's dead, and now Darth Vader is here. So he really wouldn't have had, this is my opinion, I don't think he would have had that attachment to him where he felt the need to save him still. But he sensed the light in him, and he knew that his father was still in there. So I think Palpatine's biggest failure was more on the side of Vader, not so much Luke.
Right. I think it just goes to show how powerful of a Jedi Anakin really was.
Yeah.
In the light side. That he was able to sort of go into hiding and not take the reins for years. But then when the world needed it most, that light side of him was able to project through, and Anakin was almost reborn and justified himself and all the actions he had taken over the previous years.
Definitely.
It's kind of comparable to Kylo Ren, is it not?
Oh yeah, very, very, because you have Leia, and Han doesn't. He's not a force wielder, but Leia is. Leia always says, I feel the good in him. Rey, favorite character, lover. She says many times that there's still good in Ben Solo. So it's very possible, and that could be just the Skywalker blood. It just was made for. The light side, the Jedi, like that's what it was made for. Unfortunately, they also ended up being two of the greatest villains in Star Wars history, but their redemption saved two trilogies. So it is really interesting, and there are a lot of parallels.
No, that's fantastic. I completely agree. It's cool because it's Kylo and Vader, and then Ben Solo and Anakin.
Yeah,
and it's just weird to think that they're different people, but or not at the same time.
You know what would be really interesting? You know how Marvel is doing that new animated show, What If, where they take a tiny
Little difference.
Yeah, so I know the most recent one to come out is, I think, it's Spider-Man. It's Tom Holland as something, but I know they were doing Peter Quill as Black Panther, or maybe T'Challa as Star-Lord. I can't remember, but it's one tiny difference, and it shows how that story would play out. So I'd love to see something in that sense about Star Wars. I think that'd be really cool to see something like that.
Right, like if Anakin wouldn't have killed Dooku, with cutting his head off when Palpatine's telling him to do it in that room. Speaking of Dooku, so going back to the main point, Palpatine was obsessed with power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so obviously there's the rule of two that the Sith follow. Okay, if Palpatine was really obsessed with power, would it not make more sense for him to gain as many powerful Force-wielding Sith as possible to fight for him?
I think what it comes down to is Palpatine wants all the power for himself. And let's say there's an argument for who's stronger, Palpatine or Vader, Palpatine, Dooku, all these things, but it's another conversation saying, okay, well, who's stronger, Palpatine or Dooku and Vader? So I think Palpatine needs to he doesn't care. I don't think he cares about the Sith. He cares about him. He cares about him being immortal, him always having the power. So I think if he trained more, it would be very easy for his students to rise up and say, okay, well, why are we, like I kind of said with Vader, why are we going to be slaves to Emperor Palpatine when we have the means to kill him and we can do this ourselves? So I think he needs to keep it just the two so he can maintain that power balance. But going back to Dooku, I know you and me have talked about this recently. He's clearly a very evil character too, but it is very, when I was making this video, I really had to spend a good few minutes when I was making the edits for the first part. I really had to spend a little time editing the scene where Anakin kills Dooku, and Dooku's sitting there on the ground, and he hears his master tell this kid, kill him, with just that evil look on his face, that evil smile. And Dooku's face, you can tell that in that moment he feels so expendable. He's
betrayed.
Yeah, in that you could just see it in his eyes, because you never see Dooku. He doesn't feel remorse. It seems like it's almost like he doesn't feel the feelings that Jedi and that just regular people feel. But in that moment, he knew that his life was about to end. But then there's this scene, there's the little clip where he looks up at Anakin. And I've never really noticed his face before, but you can tell that he's just hoping that Anakin doesn't kill him. And then, Palpatine, obviously, his famous line, do it. Anakin just slices his head right off. So that was a really powerful scene from three different ends, because you have Dooku on one side, everything we just talked about. You have Anakin with arguably one of the biggest crossroads down his path to the dark side, because who knows if he wouldn't have killed Dooku. And then you have Palpatine, where it'd be interesting to see what would have happened if Anakin didn't kill him in that point on Palpatine's end, because let's say Dooku lives,
he's gonna do something about it.
Yeah, they rescue the Chancellor. Let's say they imprison Dooku. Dooku, can easily say, "Hey, you got your Sith Lord right there,"
right?
And kind of like a get out of jail free card. But it is really interesting.
No, definitely.
So, did you have any other stuff to talk about, or?
No, man. This is a really interesting topic, and we could go on for this.
Definitely
go on about this for hours, because there's so many things that could play into it, especially if you're talking about the what if storyline.
Yeah.
You can go back to when Anakin was like 5 years old and said, "What if he wouldn't have, done this?"
Yeah.
I completely agree, and I love to see how powerful Vader really was, that he wasn't able to let anyone surpass him, and he didn't back down to anything. He was able to beat those who were coming for him. And it just goes on to, back up the fact why Anakin / Vader is my favorite character.
Definitely.
He's just so strong, and he's unbeatable almost, and he's just awesome.
No, I agree. Definitely one of the most, if not the most complex character in the Star Wars story. But I think that is it for today's show. Again, thank you to everybody who watched the first show. We know it was a bit longer, so we tried to get this one a little bit more on the shorter side. Follow us on all our social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, at Carbonite Combos. You can follow our personal accounts. We'll have them in the description and everything. And, other than that, Alec, you want to finish us off if you have anything else?
Same thing, just to reiterate that. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'd love to get your opinions on anything we talked about, anything you want to talk about. And we'd love to even, get on a phone call or anything and talk about this stuff. We love it, and we hope you guys love it too.
Definitely. Thanks, guys.
Remember, the Force will be with you.